been meaning to hook my clothes dryer up to my phone, but I haven't done it yet.
Do you have a phone-enabled clothes dryer?
I have a Samsung clothes washer and dryer, and it's supposedly there's a Samsung app that I would hook it up with, and I can change cycles, and it's great.
So that is interesting, because what that really assumes is you went through the trouble of putting your wet clothes in the dryer and then promptly walked away because you didn't want to dry them at that minute.
This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall, Stephen Maresca, and Matt Fusaro.
Welcome to Cybersound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined as always by Steve Maresca, Matt Fusaro. Hey, guys.
Hey, how are you?
And we've got the Vancord CEO joining today, Michael Grandy. Nice to see you, Mike.
Nice to see everyone. Thanks for having me.
So this is our 2022 year in review episode. We can look back, maybe discuss a little bit of some of the changes in the industry, talk about sort of some major things that might have happened over the past year. And I think, as everybody's looking forward to reviewing our predictions that we made last year and maybe seeing how we did and maybe lend some credibility to some of the predictions maybe we have in the future for this upcoming year, right?
I'd say we're oracles.
That's what I think too. So, Mike, I want to start with you actually. So chatting a little bit about, maybe some of the evolution in our, say, technology support space, right? Consolidations and changes certainly happened over the past year. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there's been one of the main drivers. I think from an economic perspective was the prevalence of free or almost free money from an investment perspective, and what we saw, especially is the larger private equity players, gaining a lot of interest in the MSP and MSSP space. And I think it really came quite to maybe an apogee last year or over the last year with a lot of consolidation and, some regional names that have been bought out by more national names, some focused entities, either cybersecurity focused or MSP focused, being part of these large roll-up strategies. So, a lot of change. I don't know that the activity is still quite at the peak where it may have been at the beginning of the year, but for sure, we're still seeing a lot of these companies either joining forces, merging, or being acquired. And I think there's some pros and cons to it for sure from a service provider perspective, right? So we've been in this industry for over 15 years, and we've seen a lot, and we've seen a lot even in this small space of Connecticut in the Northeast. But the access to different markets and the sort of increasing role that remote work plays with a lot of these folks, you could be talking to a support provider that's half a world away with some of these larger companies, and generally they'll be able to provide reasonably good support. But I think from a client experience perspective, there's a difference. There's so much turnover at some of these companies, especially post transaction, that clients on the client side generally will experience a little bit of loss of that legacy knowledge, that customer relationship that they've probably grown accustomed to through the years with their service provider. So, some pros and cons for sure. And I think it'll probably continue into the, next year or so as we sort of see some of these efforts to combine and roll up continue. One of the other areas, and it sort of lends itself to what we've experienced this year, is a desire for clients, from clients, to see their service providers offer both that managed service provider MSP experience as well as the security expertise. And a lot of our internal changes certainly reflected some of those trends throughout this year.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think the consolidation that we've seen does validate some of the choices we've made to offer, both infrastructure and security services. And, I think originally we went into this thinking clients would like to see more of a separation, but it's pretty clear that clients are really looking for vendors that can provide the sort of the broad spectrum of capabilities, which I think we're in a position to do now, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, 2021 into 2022, cyber liability insurance pushed a lot of that, right?
For sure.
Because these clients are coming to people like us and saying, hey, I know you do infrastructure, but I need all these things for my liability policy now.
Right.
Right.
It's been helpful, honestly, as that being the impetus for us to educate the customers, prospects, and current as well. Like it's, I don't know. I think we've all moved forward together as the main message there.
Yeah, agreed.
So the other thing I think certainly we experienced over the last year, maybe the last 24 months, has been the supply chain issues, and in many ways, right, getting the equipment to fulfill some of the work that we've been asked to do by our clients, right, Mike?
Yeah. If this was a segment on the pain points of the last year or plus, or COVID struggles that continue, sort of from an industry perspective, it's certainly a long haul symptom, which is this reliance on chips for so many aspects of what we do, from cars, of course, to computer equipment, network switching equipment, and really a reliance on a lot of things coming out of Asia that unfortunately aren't being fulfilled in a timely manner, and the lack of manufacturing here in the United States for sure. And from a network perspective, infrastructure side, so many projects have either been delayed or put off, or in some cases canceled because of estimated shipping dates on some of this equipment. And it causes issues for both the client side, of course, and of course for the service providers. So, we're still seeing it across a lot of our client base, schools, public entities, private commercial businesses, making really key decisions on upgrades that are probably past due in what they'd like to accomplish, simply because of procurement issues and supply chain. So, it's a challenge that probably will last well into 23 and potentially beyond. Hopefully some of these new efforts by manufacturers will speed up some of this backlog, but definitely a pain point.
Yeah, I mean, we may even be looking at a railway strike in a week or two, right? that could have another effect on things coming out of the West Coast that we have to get over to the East Coast for some of our clients.
Right.
And I was talking to someone in a completely different industry, more on the sort of the natural organics and different types of materials that they resell. And they were talking about the fluctuation of shipping costs and how it's just, and now you're talking about, we had these huge over the road delays from shipping ports. I remember in October of last year, we were flying out from Anaheim back to the East Coast, and looking out into Long Beach Harbor, you saw, hundreds of ships sitting there waiting to be unloaded. Then they didn't have enough drivers, right? And then they had enough drivers, and the ports released a lot of that, and shipping container costs went from $21,000 for a container back down to $7,000 or whatever it might be. And now we're seeing this potential railroad strike. And so I think, it's as soon as one thing gets sort of solved or pushed in the right direction, something else potentially may break. So it's a lot of uncertainty out there.
So, looking back then at maybe our predictions from last year, I think we did okay. Certainly we talked a little bit about, say Log4j and some of the other, attacks on, libraries or, commonly used software. I think we've seen more of that.
I'd say, to some degree that has been true. Less than I expected, candidly. And I think that's tied to some of the other trends that we'll talk about in a minute. But definitely was attention placed upon OpenSSL, Apache Text Commons, Java, some of the more common underpinnings of systems, and, newsworthy exploits that were not quite as impactful as Log4j last year, or Log4Shell, if that's what you prefer as the term. But yeah, I mean, I think that stood up.
Yeah. Exchange woes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's perennial.
Yeah.
I think we we talked a bit about 5G as a, I don't love the word, but maybe a potentially disruptive technology or one that really had an impact. I don't know. From the consumer space, I think a strong argument can be made that it hasn't done too much to change people's lives. Maybe there's been some other academic things that came out of it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as changing people's lives, I think maybe you saw some faster cell service, but right. I mean, I'm not sure that on the consumer end you're seeing much benefit from it just yet. Steve, you were talking about research a little bit before we got on here.
I think some of what we were predicting was sort of a blossoming of potential attacks against new equipment. I would say that some of that is occurring. I mean, Black Hat 22 and DEF CON 30 definitely had some 5G related research, APIs across multiple mobile carriers, vulnerabilities everywhere, information revealing issues regarding SIM cards, billing information, purchasing, and that sort of thing. But nothing deeply related to 5G itself. I still think that's coming, but it didn't really come to the forefront this year.
We did see, which I don't think we predicted as part of our what we talked about last year, but we saw a lot of VPN endpoints being exploited this year. We dealt with a few incidents due to it, so that was definitely a target for people.
Yeah, that seemed to be a really common sort of attack surface that people leveraged this year. But on that note, and I don't actually think we called this out. Was a real downturn in sort of the ransomware activity. I mean, we certainly had fewer incidents. Certainly, peers in our space that I've spoken to say the same thing. I certainly don't want to convey that there hasn't been ransomware attacks. Obviously, there have been, right? But fewer than previous years. I think there's probably a couple of contributing factors to that, and obviously the war is one of them, right? Right now, I'm not seeing any reason to believe that we're going to see a dramatic uptick in the upcoming year.
I don't know. I'd be cautious about that. I know the Emotet system is back online with newer versions, so that's something to watch out for. They were always a precursor to ransomware. I think as the Ukrainian war progresses or comes to an end, who knows what it's going to be in the next few months. But I think at this point, it's starting to kind of kick up again. We're seeing a lot more intelligence from our partners on possible botnets getting back online.
Right.
So.
I think what we predicted was, increasing rates of very specific types of ransomware and extortion attacks. That prediction held true, double and triple extortion being far more common than they were in the year prior. But the overall, gross rate of incidents in that regard dropped, and it's part of distraction, part of crypto prices collapsing. Lots of other components influence that aside from simply geopolitical distractions.
But actually, that's a really good point. Of course, is the volatility of the crypto market. I'm sure has had a huge impact on this, right? So that's just one of those other factors.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially with a lot of exchanges actually collapsing, it's very possible that some of these groups lost a lot of their own money.
Right.
So.
I don't know if anybody wants to spend a second on Twitter or any of the social media activity that occurred as a result of that. I mean, it's certainly newsworthy. We didn't predict it. We might have chatted about it in one of the podcasts here in the past, but an argument can be made that Twitter's not heading in the right direction right now.
Well, you can only lose 75 to 80% of all of your technical staff and have so much success, I suppose.
Right.
Whether it survives without a major outage over the next couple of weeks remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. Most of the former Twitter staff that is vocal definitely predicts something on the horizon. I don't know. It's a platform that has been uniquely related to trust and social discourse. And I think that's eroded. That's the main comment I have to say, I suggest.
Not to sort of look forward to thinking or I guess prognosticating about what Elon's desired end was. But, I can't imagine someone investing so much into a vehicle such as Twitter without having some sort of an end game. It just his initial 3 or 4 weeks have basically thrown the traditional management book out the window of walk in, assess, listen. It doesn't seem like there was any of that. So I'm very interested to know, and maybe this won't come out for quite a while, but what sort of the intent was behind ultimately the decisions that were made in the first month or so of his ownership. It just it's a head scratcher from my perspective.
I mean, I have a poorly informed theory from
those are the best kind.
Yeah,
let's hear it.
Let's hear it. Come on.
Just from reading what everyone else is, that frankly he was trying to avoid any sort of criminal implications for gaming prices when he was not necessarily serious about purchasing, and then just doubled down to say, no, really, I was serious now, honest, and is trying to do damage control at this point. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big undertaking to be in charge of any of these types of systems at this point. So, Twitter, Meta, you name it, right? They're being looked at now as, you may as well call them news sources, because that's how people are treating them.
Utilities.
Utility
right.
almost.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think he's trying to legitimize the platform for that. I just don't know how you do that right now. That's probably the toughest information technology problem to solve, is whether information is good and reliable, right? It's the hardest problem ever to solve, but it's multi-billion-dollar deal if you do.
Right.
I think that's what he's after.
And that harkens back to an earlier podcast where we talked about understanding technology, being able to read critically, being able to communicate. Like, the fact is, I don't know that that's a technology problem we'll solve. It is an education problem, so you can actually identify, good quality news, poor quality news, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the perceived deficiencies of platforms like Twitter, when they're not deficiencies related to marketing or, sale of our personal trends, is an expression where platform inefficiencies are actually things that support social discourse. Right. Therefore, they're not negatives. But from a purely value-based analysis, of course, they're inefficiencies. Why would you do that? That human psychology aspect of it, I think, is where, finance and optimization and efficiency are incompatible with some of the fundamental purposes of the tools of the platforms.
Yeah, and for our purposes here, for our podcast, I think a lot of malicious groups feed on unstructured and maybe broken systems, and Twitter seems to have become that for the time being. So be careful. It is a cyber weapon right now if someone chooses to use it.
You cannot today search for the name of any Chinese city.
Right.
And receive results that are meaningful. At the moment, It's all a fire hose of, I'd say spam at this point. Mm-hmm. It's just unmoderated garbage, and it's to distract from legitimate content.
Right.
As an example of that.
It occurs to me, and I hadn't thought about this prior to the conversation. Steve, you mentioned double, triple extortion ransomware events. Do we ever see data disclosures on a platform other than Twitter?
Sure.
I mean, we see that, but largely it feels like Twitter tends to be the place where, when there is a post by some sort of hacking group, I feel like that's kind of the first place to see it.
The prominence of Twitter is used as a weapon because it really helps in effecting extortion if there's a likelihood that it will generate a press response or be seen by many eyes. So
there's visibility.
Yeah, I think that's the reason for it. But does that disclosure land elsewhere? Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit, right, in the spirit of trying to keep this to our normal sort of length of time. Shift a little bit into the prediction space. Steve, I know you had one at least relative to cyber liability insurance.
Yeah, I mean, the market's stabilizing. A lot of the players are understanding that they're perhaps a little excessively aggressive in securing commitments from some customers. Now, I think that they were appropriate broadly. You've heard us talk about the changing landscape in that regard many times. But there's a maturation at this point in terms of dialogue between carriers and brokers and potential customers to get ahead of the problem much earlier in the year prior to renewal, to help provide time for budgeting, for prepping, for corrective actions. It's a much more healthy conversation than it was a year or 2 years ago. Now all of the proper parties are involved across an organization. Generally speaking, I expect further improvements overall. I also think, and this is just echoing some of the things we hear from conversations with brokers and carriers, we'll see a return to the market of some of the players that have exited some verticals because they recognize that either they've overcorrected for potential costs and risk, or they really think that their market needs to have some degree of broader representation. Otherwise, they won't have a robust income as they used to. That's what I think we're looking to see in the next 12 months or so.
Probably another one, and we've seen some of this in 2022 so far. I think we'll see it continue. Is that tightening of the regulatory landscape, right? We've certainly got sort of GLBA has been pushed a bit, but we're going to see some more activity there. PCI has been updated. Continual evolution of CMMC in the Department of Defense space. I think, Steve, you said it well before, which was we're all maturing in this together to some degree. I think cyber insurance has helped drive that a bit. And I think people are also recognizing that they've got regulatory requirements that they need to meet and probably are treating it a little bit more seriously than I feel like they have in the past. And I think we're seeing some of the maturation of some of these anyway.
I think the smaller orgs are really just starting to wake up. The more mature orgs, those that are contractors with bigger industries, saw these things a year and a half, 2 years ago. The smaller manufacturers that are, secondary, tertiary subcontractors of other firms are really only just starting to catch up. Many of them are too small. So they're not able or even realistically expected to comply with a lot of the regulations that frankly will come down the pike. But I think that's what we'll see over the next few months, 6 months. Once rulemaking actually gets a little firmer in the CMMC space, at the very least, we'll have broader understanding of the complexity of the problem.
Right.
Yeah, I'd like to see how that all plays out over the next probably around 6 to 8 months or so with economic downturn. I think economic downturn is going to change the playing field, especially for smaller business over that time period. We were recently working on a deal where the IT director was basically told, do whatever it takes to stop a ransomware attack. I don't think that language will be used for a while. Do whatever it takes is costing a lot of money right now.
Right.
So I think probably the psychology of businesses and how they budget is going to change quite a bit. We'll see what that means for security budgets. I don't know. Maybe they won't change. Who knows? Maybe that priority will still be there, but it's definitely going to be called into question. So be prepared to show value, I suppose.
Yeah, the two don't go hand in hand, right? So we're seeing the maturation in regulations, right? I think people are understanding it, but the fact is they are expensive,
right?
And not every organization has the budget to do all of the work that they need to. But I want to be careful and say, that doesn't mean you don't start. You get your roadmap in place, understand what your sort of sequence of improvements is going to be, budget for it. It might take you a few years.
I think what, bouncing off that comment, I think what we're about to see is a far more nuanced discussion about risk management, what risks are accepted, which are deferred, which are considered just tolerable.
Deliberate steps.
Right. And that will save money, as well as demonstrate forethought in a lot of areas that candidly probably don't apply to some businesses at all, which I think is the right approach.
And I think, Michael, we were chatting a little bit about maybe seeing an increasing available funds coming out of the government, or even just increased government support, perhaps.
Yeah. It certainly seems like there's an evolving trend over the last several years. Most likely bringing sort of cyber and IT focus from a policymaker and politician perspective, coming out of the last presidential election, talking about election security, and then the new CISA director with Jen Easterly, and a lot of what went into these midterms, and how, really it's just a constant reminder every 2 years, every other year perhaps, on sort of the efforts that are being made from a governmental level. But I think, it was very interesting last year. I think May, summertime or so, the White House really led that sort of federal zero trust strategy. It brought that term really into the forefront. I know there's a pod that you guys had on zero trust, a few months ago, but just having that conversation in the discourse and having politicians understanding the value and the importance of some of these measures is really helpful. Very interesting to see the FBI director yesterday talk about sort of offensive cyber operations that were taking place against state and non-state actors, really in a little bit of a change from what we've heard from a lot of these entities in the past. Sort of the old a good defense is a good offense. So, we'll see what those trends continue to show. Obviously, the several of the economic acts over the last Congress, is they're designated to put more funds into the hands of businesses and state and local entities to make these improvements and changes. So, obviously that's a key development that will have to be, guiding our clients, and other service providers will be hopefully assisting their clients in those areas and ensuring that they're taking good advantage of some of those opportunities to shore up their presence and stance and sort of make those necessary improvements.
I see a lot of those funding opportunities as sort of a federal recognition that a lot of the requests and mandates put into place upon smaller orgs exceed what they're able to achieve. So to some degree, there's sort of a correction and pressure relief valve for that sort of thing. I expect to see more of it because of that fact, especially if we do enter, legitimate economic downturn. Typical practices in that sort of environment, keeping machine shops open, keeping things up to date when budgets might otherwise be reassigned is, integral to all of that.
So maybe the last thing, because we chatted about it a tiny bit before, is maybe the continued proliferation of smart home devices. But I want to bring that back to a security perspective, right? Because clearly we're seeing everything under the sun be connected to the internet now. I think either Matt or Steve, one of you had mentioned that there's a little bit of movement now from say wireless enabled or directly internet connected to maybe utilizing some internal proxies or Bluetooth or things like that, right?
Yeah. So a new trend over the last year or so, but certainly cresting over the last few months, is the release of platforms that don't have any real explicit dependency upon cloud synchronization or cloud processing or storage. Because it's a recognition of a lot of those providers that either, your internet connection's required for the thing to work, which is pretty unreliable on a lot of markets, or, concerns about data being, leaving the home. There are differentiating factors to be able to say, hey, all of your data is home. It doesn't go anywhere. It's not being sold. We're selling this platform so that you can use Bluetooth and an app on your phone, on an old phone that doesn't need a subscription or a connection to manage your device and this thing that we have for you. The example that I have in mind is like a home automation platform with sensors and curtain opening and thermostats and things like that. The model for 8 years has been everything cloud connected.
Yep,
and that's nice, but a lot of people prefer otherwise now, anyway. And if you can manage it all from your phone within your local network or without a network at all using Bluetooth, there's a major benefit there. And that's the trend I'm starting to pay attention to.
Yeah, I hope it continues down that path versus more cloud-connected things. I mean, we're seeing negative impacts of that. I mean, stuff that happened with cars over this year with subscriptions being required to unlock. I mean, basic mechanical functions, which is just ridiculous in my opinion. But I mean, it's starting to even spill over into things like power tools. They have things now where if you don't have a key on you, your circular saw doesn't work. Right.
I have not.
It's to prevent against theft and job site theft things. I get it, but at the same time, I don't know. Do we need that? I don't know.
Right. This is the John Deere model, just
right,
delayed by multiple years for the home market, and it will backfire in exactly the same way. It's just everyone needs to catch up to that recognition.
Right. But that's one step away from my circular saw doesn't go 45 degrees because I didn't get the subscription.
It is interesting, though, the idea that you brought up, Steve, that there's a trend toward accessing your home automation from within your home only, right? And well, I say that because and literally this just happened to me yesterday where I have, Nest thermostats. I did not turn the one that was upstairs down like I do every night. But literally, I was only halfway down my stairs and I stopped and I thought to myself, should I go back up or is it easier just to go right back down and launch my Nest app? And so they've gotten that quick and that easy that I sometimes now don't even bother with the actual thermostat itself, even if I'm 15 feet away from it.
And you might even extend that by saying, are you losing something by having only the use or having the use only limited to your house? The truth is
I would say maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Most of the companies that are doing what I suggested are actually also giving you a base station that is cloud aware if you want it to be.
Yeah. Right, that's the proxy.
But at least they're inverting it so that you have a choice as opposed to being railroaded into something you cannot control.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we are moving though such that sometimes it's simpler to stay in your chair than it is to get up and walk over to your thermostat or turn your oven on, right? Or maybe in Michael's case, actually turn your dryer on.
Or your bathroom.
My alarm's going off right now. I think the whites are done. One of the questions, unrelated to the sort of Internet of Things topic, really in the spirit of prediction, and only because we're certainly not we're not experts in the field of financial modeling and economics. However, it is sort of interesting with the collapse of cryptocurrency and maybe just to pick on Bitcoin, maybe a little around the horn of where we think in a year one of those currencies will be, whichever you choose.
So I guess I could pick a currency. And I'll do that in a second. What I will say is the people who invest in crypto, I still think makes up sort of the minority of investors. And there's this prevailing idea that the crypto market has it's been like a runaway train, and if you invested within the last couple of years, you're way late. And honestly, I would argue there's a lot of settling that has to happen, and we're still really early on this. None of them really have a value that isn't tied to a fiat currency. Until you can get that separation, I feel like we're in the infancy still. So, for people who feel like they've missed the boat, my opinion is you probably have not. From a currency standpoint, if I'll go on a limb, I'm really curious to see what happens with Ripple. Now that some of the FTC issues look like they're probably settling out to some degree, or at least there's some movement there. That's one I've been interested in. It's one I like the sort of financial space of cryptocurrency and something that might ease transactions in other countries. So I'm kind of curious to see what Ripple does. In my opinion, Bitcoin's not as interesting to me. There's a variety of others, but I kind of keep my eye there.
Yeah, I agree with you as far as Bitcoin is not that interesting to me, but I think the real reason is you don't want a volatile asset being a currency. That is the detriment of a currency, is having a volatile asset. So most of it doesn't work right now. I don't know too much about Ripple personally, so maybe that's a good way to go. But yeah, I mean, most of the ideals though are going to stick. I think as we need better transactions, more efficient settling of funds.
Right.
So I agree.
Yeah, stability is critical.
Yeah, you can't have it going up and down and be a call of currency. Right. It's not going to work.
Unless you're trying to build the hype and then make money off of the hype, which I think is a
Right.
substantial reason that some of this stuff gets.
Yeah, and you can invest in the highs and lows right now in crypto, right? And make some money probably.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a thought, Mike?
Well, I'll pick Ethereum, and I'll sort of expect that the volatility will continue, and I would say that it'll be under 1,000, this time next year, which is not a tremendous drop, but I think with some volatility and some increases throughout the year, I don't want to say I'm hedging, but the sort of the strategy of dollar cost averaging and then looking for markets where these different types of currency are going to take off. It's interesting. And Twitter, maybe this is a poor source of some of this information, of course, but seeing sort of the promotion and pumping done by a lot of sort of made up celebrities and gurus of different markets, and then seeing as fast as some folks can get out of it as soon as the going gets rough, has been pretty interesting. So sort of more of the stable coin interest for me. I'll pick, sub 1,000 for an Ethereum by next year.
So maybe this is an appropriate time to say the views expressed on this podcast are of the podcast members only and should not be considered investment advice.
Or legal advice.
Or legal advice. Right? Or any advice. Right?
Just entertainment purposes only.
Honestly.
I think we did our disclaimer. So no one can claim that they're looking to us to fulfill their Harrier jet for points. We're good there.
But the stable coin idea is an interesting one, right? Because there was the USDT Tether that existed. And actually, I haven't looked at that in quite a while. So I'm not sure what the position is there, right? But that idea of tying a cryptocurrency directly, essentially, to the U.S. dollar and calling it a cryptocurrency, I guess it gives a little bit of stability, I suppose, but to what end, right?
Yeah, and I believe the Fed was asked to look into some type of virtual currency of their own. So we'll see what that ends up being.
Yeah, we have to be careful not to become the cryptocurrency podcast. There's a lot of good ones out there, right? So,
yep.
Certainly a few predictions. I'll look forward to next year and seeing kind of where we landed on a couple of these. I think we did all right the last year. Maybe to varying degrees. I don't know. Any parting words from you, Michael, at all? Anything you had covered that you wanted to?
No, I think we covered quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to the next year. I'm optimistic. I think from some of the things that were discussed, especially cyber liability insurance and trends in the marketplace. Hopefully, from a governmental support perspective, we'll see that continue moving forward, and businesses and organizations can continue to strengthen their resiliency and focus on. As we always like to say, focus on the fundamentals. They're all positive steps and moving in positive direction. So, I'm optimistic moving forward.
It sounds like maybe there's some activity on your end, Michael, with law enforcement. So, maybe we should adjourn until next year and see where things stand.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. Anyway, as always, a lot of stuff in this podcast probably went a little bit over time. We appreciate everybody listening. If anybody has predictions they'd like to make and want to let us know, feel free. If you totally disagree with something we said, let us know. And if you heard something about crypto and you make your fortunes, we'd appreciate to know that as well, even though we're not giving you any advice, right?
That's right.
All right. And on that note, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Vancord Security. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been Cybersound.